My name is Madison Clark. I am 31 years old, and I'm from Phoenix, Arizona. What happened between me and my father wasn't just a family disagreement. It was humiliation, control, and a fire that he thought would break me. But sometimes, when you try to burn someone's future, you accidentally light the path that leads them straight back to you. Have you ever had someone try to destroy your dreams just to prove they had power over you? What would you do if your own father dragged your belongings outside and set them on fire, calling it a lesson? Would you scream? Would you cry? Would you forgive him? And what if I told you, years later, I stood in front of that same house, not as his daughter, but as the new owner? How did I go from watching my memories turn to ash to holding the deed in my hand? Stay with me, because this revenge didn't happen overnight. It wasn't supposed to be a life-changing night. It started with something small. It always does, doesn't it? A comment, a tone. You think you know better than me. I had just told my dad I wasn't going to quit my internship to work full-time at his friend's auto shop. I wanted to finish school. I wanted something different, something he didn't choose for me. He didn't yell at first. That would have been easier. Instead, he went quiet. And in our house, silence was the real warning. He walked past me, slow, calm, too calm, opened my bedroom door. I remember thinking he just needed space. I was wrong. I heard the closet doors slide open, hangers clattering, drawers slamming. At first, I stood frozen in the hallway, telling myself this was just another intimidation tactic. He'd done the shouting before, the threats before, but then I heard the front door open. And something inside my chest tightened. By the time I stepped outside, he had already started piling my things in the driveway. My clothes, my books. The framed acceptance letter from the college, he said, was a waste of money. Even the old stuffed bear my mom gave me before she passed. Neighbors' porch lights flicked on one by one. I felt heat in my face before there was even a flame. "Dad, stop," I said, not screamed, not cried, just stop. He looked at me like I was a stranger renting space in his house. "You want independence," he said calmly. "You don't get to take my support with you." And then he walked to the garage. That's when my stomach dropped. He came back holding a red gas can. You know that moment in movies when everything slows down, when your brain refuses to process what your eyes are seeing? That was me. He didn't rush. He poured it slowly, methodically. Like he was watering plants. The smell hit first, sharp, chemical, final. I stepped forward. "Please, those are my things." He didn't even look at me. He struck the lighter. For a split second, nothing happened. Then whoosh, the fire caught fast, too fast, orange swallowing denim, paper curling into black lace, the bear's fur melting into something unrecognizable. I didn't cry. That's the part people never understand. I just stood there, watching everything I had, every little piece of proof that I existed outside of his expectations, turn into smoke. And in that moment, I realized something. He wasn't trying to punish me. He was trying to scare me back into control. He wanted me small, dependent, grateful. The neighbors whispered, someone filmed. Nobody stepped in, because technically, it was his property, and technically, I was an adult living under his roof. When the fire died down, he looked at me and said the words I'll never forget. "Now you'll learn." He thought he had taken everything from me that night. But what he didn't understand was this: when you burn someone's belongings, you don't burn their ambition. You don't burn their pride. You don't burn the part of them that's been waiting for a reason to leave. That night, standing in front of ashes, breathing in smoke and humiliation, I didn't lose my future. I found it. And I walked away with nothing except a promise to myself. One day, I wouldn't be the one standing outside that house feeling powerless. One day, the roles would be different. He just didn't know it yet. Fire I didn't pack. There was nothing left to pack. After the fire died and the neighbors retreated behind their curtains, I stood there staring at what used to be my life. The driveway was still warm. Ash floated through the air like gray snow. He went back inside, locked the door just like that. No dramatic goodbye, no final warning, just the click of the deadbolt. And I remember thinking, so this is what it feels like to become disposable. I walked to the sidewalk with one backpack I'd grabbed before things escalated. Inside was my cracked phone charger, my wallet, and a hoodie that smelled like smoke. That was it. I didn't call anyone at first. Pride is a strange thing. It keeps you silent when you should scream. But around midnight, when the temperature dropped and reality settled in, I texted a friend from my internship. "Can I crash on your couch for a few days?" I told her it was temporary. I told myself that too. The first night on her couch, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flames, heard the lighter flick, smelled gasoline. Humiliation doesn't just sit in your chest, it echoes. I went to work the next morning like nothing happened. Same clothes, same forced smile. I avoided mirrors because I didn't want to see the girl who had just been publicly erased. But something shifted in me that week. I stopped arguing in my head. Stopped replaying what I could have said differently. Instead, I started calculating. If I picked up extra shifts, if I cut every unnecessary expense, if I saved every single dollar, maybe this wasn't the end of my stability. Maybe it was the beginning of my leverage. I worked mornings at the internship and nights at a diner 3 blocks away. I learned how to function on 4 hours of sleep. I learned which gas stations had the cheapest coffee. I learned how to shower quickly at the gym before anyone noticed. I didn't actually live anywhere permanent. Couches turned into air mattresses. Air mattresses turned into a tiny shared room with peeling paint and thin walls. It wasn't glamorous. It was survival. Meanwhile, my dad told relatives I had stormed out dramatically, that I was ungrateful, that I needed to learn responsibility. I didn't defend myself. That's the part people expect, right? The confrontation, the social media post, the family group chat explosion, but I stayed quiet because noise doesn't build credit, noise doesn't create savings, noise doesn't buy assets. Discipline does. Every paycheck I split it 3 ways: rent, food, savings, no exceptions, even when I wanted to quit. Even when my feet ached so badly after double shifts that I cried in the shower. There were nights I questioned everything. Was he right? Was I stubborn? Was I chasing something unrealistic? But then I'd remember the fire, the way he looked at me like I was replaceable. And suddenly, exhaustion felt lighter than regret. What he thought was punishment became fuel. I started reading about financial literacy on my lunch breaks. Watching videos about property investment instead of scrolling mindlessly. Learning about credit scores, debt ratios, leverage. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was preparing. He assumed I'd come back eventually, apologetic, humbled, dependent. But every day I stayed away, every bill I paid on time, every dollar I saved quietly, I was building something he couldn't see. Because sometimes the strongest comeback doesn't look like revenge. It looks like silence. And I was getting very, very good at being silent. There's a moment in survival where you stop thinking short-term. You stop asking, how do I get through this week? And you start asking, how do I never end up here again? That shift. That's where everything changed. By year 2 of being on my own, I wasn't just working hard, I was working strategically. My credit score had climbed quietly, month by month. I had no flashy purchases. No vacations, no new phone upgrades, just discipline. I lived below my means so aggressively it almost felt extreme. Roommates, thrift stores, meal prep every Sunday. Automatic transfers into savings the second my paycheck hit. Every dollar had a job. And then one afternoon, during a lunch break, I stumbled onto something that made my heart stop. I wasn't even looking for it. I had started browsing real estate listings casually, more like manifestation than action. Dreaming, visualizing. Imagining the day I wouldn't have to ask anyone for security again. And there it was, the address, his address. At first I thought it had to be a mistake, but no, the photos were unmistakable. The driveway, the oak tree in the yard, the front porch where I used to sit and do homework, listed for sale, quietly, no announcement, no family message, no dramatic explanation, just for sale. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the screen, my pulse loud in my ears. Why would he sell? That house wasn't just property to him, it was pride, control, identity. Then I noticed something else. Price reduced, twice. That meant urgency. That meant pressure. I didn't call him. I didn't text relatives. I didn't ask questions. Instead, I did what I had trained myself to do for 2 years. I researched public records, mortgage data, market trends in the neighborhood, property tax history, and the deeper I looked, the clearer it became. He wasn't selling because he wanted to. He was selling because he had to. Bad refinancing decision, adjustable rate spike, late payments stacked up. Pride kept him silent, but numbers don't lie. The man who burned my belongings to teach me responsibility was drowning in financial mismanagement. I wish I could say I felt immediate satisfaction, but honestly, I felt calm, dangerously calm. Because this wasn't about revenge in the emotional sense anymore. This was leverage. I called a real estate agent the next day, not to ask if I could afford it, but to confirm strategy. Pre-approval. Already done. Savings, solid. Debt-to-income ratio, clean. For the first time in my life, I wasn't the unstable one in the equation. I was the strongest financial candidate in the room. And here's the part nobody talks about. I didn't want the house for nostalgia. I wanted it for power. Ownership isn't about walls and windows. It's about control. The same driveway where my life burned down. Now it was an asset undervalued in a declining negotiation. And the more I thought about it, the more poetic it became. He tried to teach me a lesson with fire. What he accidentally taught me was independence. And now, the market was about to teach him something else. I didn't tell anyone what I was planning. Not friends, not coworkers. Silence had protected me before. It would protect me again. Because sometimes revenge isn't loud. Sometimes it's paperwork, and I was about to sign mine. I didn't drive by the house. I didn't stand across the street reminiscing. I didn't need closure. I needed precision. By the time I contacted my real estate agent, my voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. This wasn't emotional anymore, it was strategic. Submit a clean offer, I told her. Above asking, minimal contingencies, fast close. She paused. You really want this one? Yes. I didn't explain why. The house had already been sitting on the market long enough to signal pressure. 2 price reductions. Listing photos that looked staged but tired. The kind of listing that whispers, we need this gone. And when someone needs something gone, you move quickly. My pre-approval letter was solid. My financials were clean. No drama, no complications. Within 24 hours, the offer was sent. I didn't tell my dad it was me. Not yet. The next 3 days stretched longer than the past 3 years combined. I checked my phone constantly, but I never initiated contact. I let the process breathe. Then my agent called. They accepted. Just like that, no counteroffer, no hesitation. Accepted. I sat there in silence after the call ended. The room around me felt still, like the air itself was waiting for my reaction. I didn't smile, I didn't cry, I just exhaled. Because here's the truth, he signed the contract without knowing who the buyer was. He needed the money, and pride doesn't pay mortgage arrears. The closing date was set for 2 weeks later. I decided I wouldn't show up in person until the final paperwork was complete. Everything went through attorneys, everything professional, clean. Detached, I wasn't his daughter in this transaction. I was the buyer. The day of closing, I walked into the title office wearing a blazer I bought on clearance 2 years earlier for job interviews. Back then, I wore it hoping someone would give me a chance. Now I wore it because I didn't need one. My lawyer reviewed the final documents. I signed each page slowly, deliberately. Every signature felt heavier than ink. When the last document slid across the table and the keys were placed in front of me, something unexpected happened. My phone buzzed. It was him. I stared at the screen for a full 5 seconds before answering. Hello, silence on the other end. Then his voice, tight, controlled. You bought it. Not a question, a statement. Yes, I said calmly. Another pause. I could almost hear his mind replaying the night of the fire. The driveway, the lighter, the certainty in his voice when he told me I'd learn. I didn't know, he muttered. I know. That's when it hit him. He hadn't just lost the house. He had signed control over to the one person he thought he had erased. The power dynamic didn't explode. It shifted quietly. "I'll need some time to move," he said, pride still fighting for oxygen. I looked down at the finalized deed in my hand. "You can stay," I replied evenly. "But we'll formalize it properly." Silence again, because the rules were different now. No yelling, no burning, no intimidation, just terms, clear, legal, binding. For the first time in my life, he wasn't holding authority over my head. He was negotiating under it. And the man who once tried to teach me a lesson about dependence had just learned one about leverage. The offer he thought was salvation was mine, and I had never felt more in control. The first time I walked back into that house as the owner, it didn't feel triumphant. It felt quiet, different. The walls were the same. The faint scratch marks near the hallway corner were still there, from when I used to drag my school backpack along the paint. The kitchen light still flickered if you flipped it too fast. But the energy completely shifted. He was sitting at the dining table when I walked in, not at the head, just sitting. Papers spread out in front of him, bills, utilities. Numbers he could no longer ignore. For years, that table had been his command center, his place of lectures, of rules, of as long as you live under my roof. Now the roof was mine. I didn't rub it in. That would have been easy. Instead, I placed a folder in front of him, a lease agreement. Standard terms, fair rate, clear expectations, nothing inflated, nothing cruel. Professional, he looked at it like it was written in another language. "You're serious?" he asked quietly. "Yes." There was no anger in my voice, no edge, just calm. Because here's something people misunderstand about revenge: the real power isn't in screaming back. It's in not needing to. "I won't embarrass you," I added evenly. "But this is business now." That sentence hung between us heavier than any insult ever could. Business, no more emotional leverage, no more parental dominance. No more fear of eviction or control disguised as discipline. Just terms. He picked up the pen slowly, the same hand that once held a lighter over my belongings. For a second, just a second, I wondered if he'd refuse, if pride would make him walk away. But pride doesn't compete well with reality. He signed. And in that moment, something unexpected happened inside me. I didn't feel victorious. I felt released, because buying the house was never about humiliating him. It was about closing a loop. He tried to teach me that I couldn't survive without him, but survival turned into strategy. Strategy turned into ownership, and ownership turned into peace. Over the next few months, we interacted differently. Measured, polite, careful. He paid rent on time. He fixed things around the house, not because he was the authority anymore, but because it was part of the agreement. Respect wasn't demanded. It was mutual. And slowly, I realized something even bigger. Power doesn't just change hands financially. It changes emotionally. I wasn't scared of him anymore. I wasn't seeking his approval. I wasn't trying to prove anything. The little girl who stood in the driveway watching her memories burn, she would have never believed this version of us. But here's the twist no one expects. The greatest revenge wasn't owning the house. It was knowing I didn't need it to validate me. If he left tomorrow, I'd still be stable. If he apologized, or never did, I'd still be whole. Because when someone tries to reduce you to ashes, and you rebuild quietly, strategically, patiently, you don't just gain property. You gain freedom, and that's a lesson no fire can erase. Fire if this story hit you in the chest, if you've ever been underestimated, controlled, or told you'd never make it without someone, drop a fire in the comments. I read every single one. And tell me this, if you were in my position, would you have bought the house, or would you have walked away completely? Don't forget to like this video. It helps this story reach someone who needs to hear it. And subscribe because the next story, let's just say, sometimes the quiet ones come back the strongest. I'll see you in the next one.